Data doesn't exist unless it exists in two places or more. We're getting a little bit nerdy today on the Bearded Tog. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bearded Tog Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We've got a fun episode today. We're talking about backing up hard drives and workflow a little bit. And this is kind of a nerdy, ugly topic that a lot of creative people don't want to get into until it's too late. And I just wanted to create this episode as a resource to help those who are kind of like, where do I even start? Like, what do I need? Do I need an external hard drive? Do I need Dropbox? What do I need? How do I make this work? A lot of times too is, we only find out one of two ways. We either find out when a drive fails and we have like a terrible incident and that's awful. And we're like, oh no, I wasn't backed up. I don't even know how to back up. What do you even do? Like, I just assume that computers last, for a long time. Or we discover more about hard drives when we fill up the main drive on our computer. I know for me, back in high school, a long time ago, my buddy, my best friend, his name is Skip, we loved music. And so we had tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of CDs. And so like anybody with CDs, we would, import those CDs and then have all the songs on our computer, and we put them on our like little MP3 player, and it wasn't an iPod or anything like that. This is 2005, and it was awesome, and we had all our songs, and it was super cool, and I would like manually add the artwork to everything, and it was great. But on my parents' old Windows PC computer, we started running out of space, both of us, and Skip was like, bro, we need to get external hard drives. And I'm like, what's an external hard drive? And we kind of found out and researched a little bit, and we both bought, I think mine was a 160 gigabyte external hard drive, which is ironically now less than what my iPhone holds. He bought an 80 gig, and we put all our songs on there, and we were both kind of in graphic design in high school. And so we put all of our designs on there, Photoshop documents, everything. And it was really cool. And what was funny about it is they were huge and they were really big, and they were only one drive, and we had to, bring the power supplies with them because they were powered. And, it was okay because we had all our data with us. No matter where we went, no matter what computer we plugged into, we had our data. And so for me, probably 12 years now, I've been dealing with external hard drives. And now that I run a business, it revolves around data, like photography and videography and being creative, like even running a podcast. My podcast takes up surprisingly a lot of space. And, so like now I'm surrounded by drives and cloud storage. And so for me, it's never really been that intimidating to me, but it is a necessary evil, if you will, if that makes sense. It's one of those things. I wouldn't say it's as bad as taxes or finances or anything like that, but it's definitely not as fun as, making something cool or being in charge of your own schedule. So, but it's something we want to talk about, and it's something that you don't want to run into too late. I don't want to scare people. A lot of people always want to try and make people nervous during this time, but ultimately, I just want you guys to feel relaxed, but at the same time, feel prepared. Does that make sense? So the first thing really, and I won't spend too much time on this to really talk about when it comes to all this nerdy stuff, is really just knowing like what you have on your computer. And so for the primary sake of this conversation, I'm going to keep it super simple. But basically, every computer has a hard drive. And that hard drive is where data is stored for long term. And what they mean by long term is they usually just mean for the sake of longer than one individual use. That's kind of like the guideline. And so what that means is, you'll hear a lot of people say, no, I have tons of RAM. I put in all this memory and it tells me I ran out of storage. What they're actually saying is that there's a thing called RAM, and that is random access memory, if you're getting really nerdy. And that is like how much multitasking you can do. So if you picture somebody on stage and they can juggle one ball and it's not too hard for them, and like, okay, yeah, they're juggling. So they throw another ball in there and they can juggle two balls, and then you throw in a plate and a car and maybe like a baby dinosaur or something. I don't know. This person is a really crazy juggler, and so they are juggling all these things. And, that's like what RAM is. It's how much you can do at one time, as far as like multitasking. It's how many things can you do at one time. Whereas storage, your hard drive is like long-term storage, so you turn your computer off, turn it back on, the hard drive is what stores all your data. Whereas if you turn your computer off, everything that's like in RAM is gone. And so don't get too confused about that. Like if you save a document and then close it and then, it's saved, like it's on your hard drive, but they're just two different kinds of things going on. And RAM is usually for immediate things and quick things. Also, too, something I run into is people wondering what is the difference between a hard drive and a SSD. And essentially, both of those are exact same things. They just access their data differently. But for the sake of this conversation, we're just going to say that one accesses them slower than the other. And so a traditional hard drive, like a HDD, if you ever see that, or hard drive disk on a computer, sometimes you'll see like 5,400 RPM or 7,200 RPM next to that. That means that those are spinning disks inside that little box, and they spin kind of like a record player, kind of like 7 record players stacked on each other. And that's where all your data goes, and they spin really fast. I mean, 7,000 times per minute. And that's why hard drives fail, so like there's so many tiny moving parts in there, and that is, terrifying. And they got really good at making them, but it's just not as fail-proof as SSDs. So SSDs stands for solid state drive. And technically that's kind of the same drive that you might have in like a smartphone as well. And there's no moving parts in it. And because there's no moving parts, the computer can access data a lot faster. And so a lot of SSDs are really, really fast. And so they're really made for, professionals and high performing computers. I have multiple SSDs. I have one in my computer and I have a few others. And so, because I want to get stuff done more quickly, and, it's kind of that time versus money thing, and so if you buy an SSD, it costs a little bit more. They used to be really expensive, but now they've gone down in price, but the SSD, I can access data more quickly. And in a laptop's case, where it's moving around in your bag or you shift it, or I'm going to confess something right here. One time I had my laptop bag too close to the edge of the seat in my back seat in my car. And I closed my door, and I didn't slam it, but I closed it to like close it. And it actually hit my laptop and kind of dented my laptop. But I had an SSD in there, so none of my data was gone. And this was a few years ago. I would never do that now. But that is one of the benefits of having an SSD, is kind of that peace of mind, at least from a moving standpoint, or when I travel a lot and I'm in like, the villages in Ethiopia, or I'm in a 100-degree day in Guatemala and I have my laptop out, the SSD, nothing's moving. It can kind of get bumped. It can, if you're riding on a truck through kind of crazy terrain, like it's really good. And not to mean that you need one if you're in a tough situation, but it's less likely to fail due to any kind of like action or movement or something like that. So essentially, that's where an SSD and a hard drive, traditional hard drive, kind of differ. And your computer probably has one of those in them. Newer computers have an SSD most of the time. And, but you might still be working on an older hard drive disk. And depending on your computer, you can actually upgrade your computer to an SSD if you're kind of nerdy enough to reinstall your OS and save all your data, which we'll get to in a second. Also, too, another thing to kind of think about is, with those drives, and this even applies to where we'll go to with external hard drives and stuff like that, is price per gig, which is just kind of like back 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. SSDs are really expensive. So you'd have like 100 gigabyte SSD, really small, and it would be $1,000. And you're like, $1,000 for 100 gigs? That's awful. Whereas now you can get I think you can get a terabyte, which is 1,000 gigs, a terabyte SSD, pretty good SSD for like $275. So it's gone down 70%, which is pretty good. So, but when it comes to hard drives, and kind of like we said, you usually, use the data on your computer, and you're like, oh man, I love this. And you're living life in the fast lane, if you will, right? You got this little folder on your desktop maybe, and everything's stored in there. And then your computer is full, or the drive on your computer fails. And that kind of leads us into our next thing, which is kind of like we talked about before, is external hard drives. And so an external hard drive is essentially one of those drives that's kind of like in your computer. It might be bigger, smaller, faster, or slower. But it's in an external enclosure, which is just like a case or something like that. And most of the time it's plugged into power, or nowadays they make like kind of portable ones that are powered by your computer's like USB port or whatever. And they're really great. And you should have at least one to back up your primary data that's on your computer. And so if you know like how much data you have on your computer, it's like, oh, my drive is 500 gig drive. You should have a 500 gig external to at least mirror them. But where it gets kind of tricky is, if you want to move that data off of your computer and onto the external and only use that, then you're kind of breaking into that rule that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, which says data doesn't exist unless it exists in two places. And that's Schofield's second law of computing. And essentially it's kind of like a weird abstract way of just saying like, you're not in a good spot unless you're backed up. Essentially, like you need to have two copies of everything of your data that you care about and that's valuable to you, no matter how you back it up, whether that's manually through external hard drive, or we'll get to cloud services in a bit. You need to make sure that all of those are backed up. With external hard drives, they're usually hooked up, through a cable or something like that. And they use what's called a protocol. And don't be scared about that. It's basically just like how they connect. And think of like different kinds of hoses, which this is like I couldn't find a good analogy for this, so I'm sorry everybody, but you have things like USB, right? Everybody's heard of USB, like the tip of your phone charger, whether you have an iPhone or anything, is USB, at least one of the ends of it. But you might have heard of like FireWire and Thunderbolt and maybe SATA or PCI Express if we're getting really nerdy. And essentially those are just how they connect. But then also too, more importantly, it's the speed at which they connect, and it's the real speed at which they connect. So as an example, like USB 2.0, which is still pretty much what a lot of things are, like an iPhone cable is a USB 2.0, isn't as fast as FireWire 800, but USB 3.0 is faster than FireWire 800, and so but then Thunderbolt is faster than both of those, and so it gets a little playful, but you can kind of see different drives with different options, and it also depends on like what ports you have on your computer. Okay, so you want to kind of find out. So if you have like a MacBook Pro, depending on when it was made, you might have a USB 2 or 3.0, you might have a Thunderbolt, and then maybe if you're still rocking an older laptop, a FireWire 800, to which you'd be a real OG. But essentially they just have different connectors, and it really just depends on like what you're looking for. Some of them cost more than others. So like Thunderbolt drives, because it's so fast and it's very flexible, are more expensive. You can daisy chain Thunderbolt, which is really cool. So you kind of only use one port on your computer, but then every Thunderbolt drive you own should have two ports. And so one is the cable to the computer, but then if you got another Thunderbolt drive, you can plug into that drive again. And so I have like 8 Thunderbolt drives. Again, I'm kind of crazy about this, but this is why, I'm doing this episode to kind of help people. And I have 100 terabytes of storage. So it gets a little nuts, but I feel really safe about things being backed up. So fun story. 2 or 3 weeks ago, at least at the time of this recording, I had a big gig for one of my clients. I was actually shooting for the National Zoo, and I was photographing this panda named Bao Bao, who was leaving the zoo, going back to China, and they were throwing like kind of basically like parties for him or for her to celebrate. And I was just photographing that. I have a contract with the zoo. They're awesome. I'm so grateful for that team. And we were shooting for them and came home, culled everything, edited everything, set it to export overnight, and then I went to bed. And the next morning, my computer was frozen. And which for me, like my computer doesn't freeze that often. I have a Mac Pro, and it's 6 cores. If you know what that means, it means 6 processors. It has 96 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabytes of internal storage. Like it's a beast. But it had frozen, and I couldn't really get it to come back using any key commands or anything like that. And so I was like, oh no, this is scary. But hopefully everything, I'm backed up, so that should be fine. So I shut down the computer the hard way, which is always like feels kind of awkward. And you press the power button and hold it, and you're like, oh no, I hope I didn't lose anything. And the computer wouldn't restart. And so I was like, oh no. And essentially I have a laptop. And so in addition to the Mac Pro, and so I looked up everything and I can check. I had the photos that I was exporting going to a cloud storage folder, so they'd automatically, go online. And so I was able to look at those folders and see that most of the photos had made it and were done. And so the client was happy, but I was still able to do my work, but my main computer was broken. And, having a hard drive fail, especially your internal drive of your computer fail, if you don't have that backed up, that could have been a recipe for disaster, that's the thing too about hard drives. So here's another big thing is every hard drive, SSD or hard drive disk, external, internal, cloud, whatever, every hard drive will eventually fail. Like, that's not to be doom and gloom. And I promised I wouldn't get like too scary, but eventually they will. And so you got to be prepared and, make sure that's good to go. Kind of getting into the nitty gritty for external hard drives, because we got off topic about my failure, but I wanted to share that as an example, is, do you plan on working using the data from the external, or just mirroring to that? Or here's an example. So let's just say, for sake of argument, your internal hard drive of your laptop only has 100 gigs. Let's just say that, and it's full, but you bought a 500 gig external hard drive. You could, in theory, back up your internal drive, and then you'd have 400 gigs left to kind of use as storage. And that's really kind of up to you. And so traditionally, probably 5-10 years ago, what professionals would actually suggest is buying 2 drives. And you say, I have to buy 2 external hard drives. And I still kind of lean that way. I'm kind of old school, but here's the deal. So if you use that 400 gigs as storage, then that's not, that data's only in one spot. And so here's the deal is, like, if that external hard drive fails, which it will someday, some fail, tomorrow, some won't fail for 10 years. It really depends. If that hard drive fails, you lose everything. And people who, are like, oh yeah, data recovery services charge a lot, and they also aren't very successful. It's really hard to get data off of the hard drives. And so you have to kind of think about that. Like, am I putting it's literally the analogy of like putting all your eggs in one basket, and somebody comes over and just stomps on the basket. It sounds terrifying, actually. And then you don't have any more eggs. So, if you like scrambled eggs, then it's bad. Anyway, it's been a long time. So guys, when it comes to external hard drives, you have to kind of think about that. Are you going to back up to it, or are you going to work off of it, or both? What are your desires? And some of my favorite brands, because people always ask for recommendations, is, and again, you have to think that every drive is going to fail. So it really just depends on like, what's the best drive for you in your budget, in the protocol we talked about, like USB, Firewire, Thunderbolt, etc. What's going to be best for you? How fast is the external hard drive? So they make external SSDs now. They're kind of expensive, but if you need to access your data really, really fast, so you're using Lightroom or doing video work, having a faster hard drive can kind of help. But for me, 2 of my favorite companies that I use are G Technology, which is made in Europe. Really cool company. They make cool products. I have all Thunderbolt products from them, but they make USB, they make everything. And they're really fast, kind of reliable. And this is, I don't know if this is a guy thing, but they look cool. and they're usually made out of metal, which is really nice. So it's like strong and just feels more reliable when I'm going out into the field, traveling and stuff like that, or I have it in my wedding bag and, it's been in the car going over bumps, sort of stuff like that. Like, I really enjoy that. And like I said, a lot of externals aren't SSDs. And so some of those considerations with like movement is still a big deal. I also love Western Digital. My very first drive from the store I told you about earlier in high school, was a Western Digital, and I've had good luck with them ever since. I use Western Digital for my portable drives. So I have, what's called a My Passport Pro, and it's a Thunderbolt external hard drive, and it's actually a RAID, which we will get into because that is super nerdy, which means there's 2 drives in there, and you can either run them in 2 different options. You can run them so the 2 drives inside the external are mirroring each other, so you have what they call redundancy, which is good, right? Or you can run it so that the 2 drives are together, and that doesn't mean that you get their combined space. I mean, you do, but that's not why you do it. It means that you can access everything twice as fast, which is pretty cool. And so, if you want more information on how RAID works, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But like, Google it. It's complicated, but it can be really useful. And so, I have that drive, and you don't have to like open the drive and click a switch. It's all software. There's like a little app that you just tell what you want. And so that's the Western Digital My Passport Pro. They make a 2 terabyte and a 4 terabyte option. I love them. It's super cool, and it's about $400, which might seem expensive, but like having all your weddings backed up on one drive, and I don't know, it's kind of a good thing. So one more note about RAID hard drives is RAID stands for Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks. And so, that's essentially what it is. It's like, oh, I'm going to buy, 6 drives and have them run together. And it used to be the crappy drives. And that's why they made that name. But RAID is essentially more of a how than a what. And so essentially, when it comes to a RAID external hard drive, kind of like the example with the My Passport Pro, you might have 2 hard drives, physical hard drives in one enclosure. And with only 2 drives, there's only 2 options, either what they call RAID 0, which is the faster one, or RAID 1, which is the mirrored one. And you can kind of have different options, and it really depends, but that's a good option if you want redundancy, because then you're only having one enclosure. It takes up less space. It's only going to take up one port on your computer, and you don't have to think about it. Like, if the probability of both drives failing in that external at the same time is really low, unless you like dropped it or kicked it, which we'll get to later on. And so then when you're talking about external hard drives and RAIDs and your internal hard drives and computers and stuff like that, the next question is like, well, how do I back it up? Do I just manually drag this folder I love over every time and then just say, replace all, or merge, or just replace it all, and it might take like really long if you have a lot of data. And so there are a few different things that you can use to automate certain things. So if you're a Mac user, you've probably heard of Time Machine. And Time Machine is actually really, really cool, kind of simple and kind of out of the way. And so what Time Machine will do is you plug in your external hard drive and go to System Preferences and turn on Time Machine, or Time Machine will probably prompt you. And essentially what Time Machine does is it literally backs up all your data from your internal drive. So it only backs up one drive. And it will kind of save like a snapshot of your computer at given intervals. So say you like made a change on a document, then saved it, and then you were like, crap, like I need to go back and what did I write this way? Or, you need to revert something. But since you saved it, some programs don't let you do that. You can go back into the Time Machine, and Time Machine will literally have the older version. And it's kind of creepy, but it's really, really cool. And it's automated. So if you just want to mirror and keep your laptop backed up or your computer backed up, or what we call mirrored, then Time Machine is a great option if you're a Mac user. On PC, I'm not really sure, but there's probably an alternative, so definitely check it out. But if you want something more complex, or what I usually do is I have one drive that is designated as backing up my computer's internal drive, so it just mirrors that. But then I have a bunch of other folders and other drives that I want to just be mirrored to other drives, but I don't want the drive to be like a boot drive, or what they call the drive that's inside your computer. I don't want to have to be able to boot from it or to start my computer with it. I just want the data to live there. And so I use a program called Synchronize X Pro, which is actually kind of like archaic now. Like not a lot of people use it anymore. So I'll probably use Carbon Copy Cloner. And what you can do, it's really cool, and these programs are really cheap. Like Carbon Copy Cloner is only $30 or $40, and you can tell it to automatically back up a folder anytime that folder changes, or schedule overnight, or you can schedule every hour, and you can really kind of decide what backup strategy you would like to employ. Another program is called Super Duper. Again, kind of old. I'm not sure if they're still updating it. But at the same time, these programs do a simple tasks. And so, they're not going to be updated that often. So you won't have to pay for any upgrades in theory for a while. But just kind of find what you're thinking and try them out. They all have good trials. I think Carbon Copy Cloner has the best trial. So it's 30 days. You can try the full program, and then they just ask you to buy it after. So really, really cool. So back up first. Get your strategy, get your storage, and then decide how you're going to back it up. You're going to back it up manually and just drag the folder, your desktop folder or your user folder every night. Try to figure out what's the best scenario for you. Secondly, here's the big question that, the past few years, a lot of people have been asking, and do I need an external hard drive with things like Dropbox and Box and Backblaze and, all of those things. And so I'm just going to run through the two things that I use, how they work, why I use them, and why I think they're a good solution, but they're not the only solution. Okay. So all of this backup strategy is kind of coming from that original line from the second law of computing, that data doesn't exist unless it exists in two places. So first off is Dropbox. And Dropbox is it's my favorite computer program, period. Like it doesn't do, I don't make photos with it, and it doesn't, bring me joy. Well, it does bring me joy sometimes. It's the best, at least for me and what I do. And so essentially Dropbox came out in 2007, 2008, and I've been using it ever since. And so it uses just a folder, and then anything you put in that folder syncs to the internet, and is accessible via a browser online anywhere in the world from any computer or your phone, or any device. And so I love that. And it's really useful to store, I store things like my Lightroom catalogs. I store tax documents, insurance stuff. I store my photos library for my personal photos. So like my iPhone photos and stuff like that doesn't go into where my work goes. I keep those separate. I store information for my fiance and I in there, and it's great. But with Dropbox, there's a limited amount of space, and that drive lives on that folder lives on your hard drive, like the one on your computer most of the time. And so, you kind of run into that space issue again. You wouldn't want to put everything in Dropbox, because it's pulling from your boot drive, and you're filling up your boot drive. And so that's not good. So if you're a writer, then Dropbox is probably great for you, right? Because like documents and stuff, you're probably using Google Docs anyway. Like that doesn't take up any space. It just really doesn't. So that's totally fine. But I mean, if you shoot 5 weddings, you're going to want to kind of figure out a different strategy. Secondly, and Dropbox also too is about $100 a month, but you can get a free trial and free like 3 or 5 gigs of space. If you just go online, there's actually a link in the show notes, if you want a bonus amount of space. So you just grab the show notes, click that link. I got that ready for you. Second thing, the second cloud service that I use and I really, really love, is Backblaze. And so Backblaze, it backs up everything. So it backs up all the files on your computer and any connected external hard drive. And so that's really cool, right? So it backs up the boot drive on your computer. It backs up all the external hard drives that you have as long as they're connected, and that you're connected to the internet. And it's $5 a month. Like, for the price of a venti iced caramel macchiato, aka my favorite drink, you can have peace of mind and everything be backed up in the cloud. and so it's really cool. The only thing that's hard about Dropbox and Backblaze, at least, is your very first initial backup, because you probably have a lot of data and it's your first time. It takes a while for it to back up. And so I know my initial backup with Backblaze took like 2 weeks, and that was on like decent internet. If you have really fast internet, it might take less time. If you have slow internet, it'll take a while. But I would promise you, I'll just say, like, leave Backblaze open, leave your computer open, just let it go to town, and even while you're sleeping and stuff like that, and just make it happen. The only kind of like downside to Backblaze, because remember the downside to Dropbox was like they don't have space. The downside to Backblaze, at least for the personal backup service, if you go to the site, you want to click on personal backup, is that it requires all external hard drives to be connected at least once every 30 days. And so if you've got like an archive drive or something that you're kind of like, I just want to put stuff on here and then never touch it until I need it, you have to keep that drive connected once every 30 days. And so that can kind of cramp your workflow and your style. And for me, I haven't really figured out what my solution is for that yet. But we're getting nerdy. I'm just revealing everything here because I want to help people. So I thought about like buying an old Mac Mini and putting my archive drives connected to that and just letting Backblaze do its job. But then those drives are spinning all the time. And so like if your drive is good and it's off, it's not being used. And so it's fine. So we're still trying to figure that out. So if you have any solutions for me, shoot me an email, thebeardedtog@gmail.com. So, but anyway, Backblaze is really cool. And at least for my immediate work and even stuff that I store long-term, but not like archive. Like archive is like, I don't plan on touching this ever again. It's been great. And I have 25 terabytes in Backblaze for $5 a month. So that's insane. But the thing about Backblaze, in addition to the external hard drive things, it's not something where you should put it in the cloud and then go get it immediately. You totally can do that. It's not as immediate as, say, Dropbox, if that makes sense. And so that's why I use both. But I figure, Backblaze is like $50 a year, $5 a month. They give you a $10 discount if you buy for the year. And then Dropbox is $100 a year. For $150 a year, all my stuff is backed up and all my immediate stuff is in Dropbox. And then everything else is in Backblaze. Like, that's pretty cool. And Backblaze even backs up my Dropbox. So getting a little crazy, but like Backblaze is essentially a catch-all. And I love it. There's also a link for that in the show notes. Definitely check it out. It's cheap. That's what I give to all my family and friends too, just because it's $5. And I'm like, why not? Another program that people use is called CrashPlan, and that gets compared to Backblaze a lot. CrashPlan is cool, but I don't use it because this is getting really nerdy here, but the way the program's written, it's written in a language called Java, and Java is very resource heavy. And what that means is that in order to back up your stuff, the computer will have to work harder to help CrashPlan back it up than it would with Backblaze. And as a creative professional, that's totally fine when my computer's not doing anything and I'm sleeping or not in use. But when it's in use, I don't want to be giving resources away to my backup program because it's not a huge priority as my immediate work. So I need all the power I can get. So that's my biggest note about CrashPlan. Then the question is, what do we do? What solution's best for us? How do we plan this out? And really, it might help to just draw a picture. Times in my life when I've wanted to redo my storage or try and figure things out, I literally just got out a pen and paper and I just drew ideas. And you just write a number on a box and say, oh, this is 2 terabytes. And, or you could go to a math store and buy those old blocks. And you're like, all right, I have 4 blocks and 4 blocks over here. And, how many can you back up? What do you need to move them to? The main reason too that I use both external hard drives, a lot of external hard drives, and cloud services backups, 2 of them, is essentially so that I have a good balance of things that I can grab immediately. So at any given time, I think 2016, all the photos that I took for clients was about 4 or 5 terabytes, the raw files. So I wanted to be able to access those. Those are still things I'm using for portfolios, submissions, blogs, etc. But then in addition, I want that backed up on the cloud as well. Another thing too, especially for photographers that people think about, is a lot of times we'll send our clients a full resolution gallery of our edited photos. And that is great for having an edited version of your JPEGs somewhere else. And those are usually pretty reliable. Like I use Zenfolio and Shootproof, and I don't store all the JPEGs from a wedding somewhere else. I have the RAWs and the catalogs for Lightroom in there, but I don't keep, like 1,000 JPEGs for their wedding just sitting nearby, because I don't want to. I do keep the blog ones because they're like most likely to go into my portfolio, but we're getting into organization now, which is another episode. And so that was primarily most of what I wanted to get out. Hopefully that wasn't too crazy nerdy. I do want to answer a few questions that I got, which is really cool. If you want to ask me a question, just thebeardedtog@gmail.com. Email me right now. Just say hi, or that you love the episode, or you hated it, or you want to disagree or ask a question. Like, I answer every email. Go for it. But one of my friends, Amy Custis, has a really interesting question that I thought would be helpful for you guys. So here it goes. It's kind of long. My workspace/computer setup is all mobile and portable. I work off of a MacBook Pro, and my active files/wedding photos I access on a portable, lacy, rugged hard drives. I make the smart previews in LR or Lightroom, and I back those and my catalogs up via Dropbox. But because my setup is all portable, beyond a Dropbox copy of my catalog and smart previews, I struggle to find a good cloud background backup solution, such as CrashPlan or Backblaze, because they all seem to run in the background, and when my setup isn't used, it's packed up and stowed away, so things like CrashPlan never catch up. How would I solve this without having to let my computer be on, stationary in a corner somewhere, connected to the internet when I'm not using it? That's an amazing question. And my answer for that, honestly, is like, oh, this sounds so mean. And I love Amy. I know Amy personally, but like, essentially this is your job. And so we kind of have to figure out that dance, is that like, what's one process that you could implement in your life every day where you open up your laptop and, let it back up overnight while you're sleeping and then put it away. I think that's just, if your work is valuable to you and your clients, and redundancy and caring for your backup is important to you, we need to figure out a solution, or, there's got to be a break somewhere else. So is that faster internet and backing it up whenever you are using the computer and stuff like that? There's no simple, easy solution, especially with electronics. Like, they have to be on and it has to work out. So the second question that I got asked was from, I don't have her name handy, but essentially she said that she didn't have good faith in external hard drives because her external hard drive was kicked off of the desk and fell into the floor, and then it didn't work anymore. And we were kind of talking about it. And so essentially I just want to say, like, especially what we talked about before with all the moving parts and hard drives, you don't have to treat them like they're very fragile, but they're not a baseball, like you can't treat them. If your computer fell off the desk, would you expect it to go bad or do something terrible? Like, you should have that expectation. So just a weird scenario, but I wanted to make that clear. Wow. So if you made it through that episode, give yourself a round of applause. Backing up is super important. Knowing where your data is super important, just because one, just the sanctity of your mind, and also the idea that, like, if you lost your client's data before it was delivered, you could get into some really big legal trouble or something like that. And so really important for you to know where your data is. If you want more information about this or have more questions, Patreon is a perfect place for that. I give away all my tips and knowledge there. I have outlines, and you can ask any questions you want about how to set up hard drives, or what hard drives do I think are best. You can put everything in there. So there's a link in the show notes. Come say hi, join the Patreon, and let's get better and be better. Have a wonderful day, guys.